The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this free webinar today on strengths and talents conversation for performance improvement. I just want to make sure that I'm being heard. So if you're new to this, you'll notice on the right-hand side there's a little drop-down box that says questions. Could you just type in the word clear? That lets me know that I'm coming across loud and clear. Otherwise, I end up talking to myself for the next half an hour. Thanks, Bronwyn. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Craig. Thank you. Okay, we've got over 100 people registered for today, so obviously this is a topic that's taken a lot of interest, and so I'm looking forward to working with you in this short, sharp session. I guess you're probably sold on the premise that working on people's strengths is really important, and I guess it is. Of course, that's not to suggest that we shouldn't be working on people's opportunities for growth as well. This isn't an excuse, of course, not to pull people up for poor performance, but nevertheless, it should supplement performance, and it should be an integral part of any leader's role to be giving good, positive, strength-based conversations. At the end of this session, you'll receive a copy of the slides, you'll receive a copy of the recording, so just relax and enjoy yourself for the next half an hour. If you've got any questions at all, you can go to the right-hand side on the question box and just type them in the moment you think about them, because obviously if you leave it to the end, it might be too late. So just type your questions in and I'll try and respond as best I can, bearing in mind we've got lots of people in today's presentation. Okay, so there's basically three things that I want to cover in this short, sharp session. I think the first thing is let's just understand why we should be talking about people's strengths as opposed to their opportunities for growth. So why should we talk about strengths? What are some of the questions that you as a leader could ask in order to make this a meaningful conversation? And the strengths and talents conversation is part of the 5 conversations framework. So I just want to finish up by talking a little bit about the 5 conversations framework and where it fits into the scheme of things, because it shouldn't be a one-off conversation, as I'm sure you'd be aware. All right, so that's what we're covering in the next 30 minutes. And a little bit of sobering news to start with. Surveys seem to be consistently showing all over the world that 70% of people are disengaged at work. Now, that should be a real worry for any of us, whether we're leaders in HR, consultants, whoever, or indeed the people who are disengaged. That's a concern, and I've got a few comments that I want to make about that, but I think one of the reasons that people are disengaged at work is that they're not really given the opportunity to work on what their innate talents are. And I think the strengths and talents conversation can change or flip things around a little bit and give people a chance to talk about the things that they enjoy doing at work and are innately talented at doing. So that's a concern, and that figure, by the way, is not improving over the last few years. It seems to be a figure that's pretty much constant right around the world across all sorts of industries as well. But what we do know is that the research does prove that what people actually enjoy doing and their strengths are connected. So there's a high correlation between what people actually enjoy doing and their innate talents. Now that's important, because if we can work out what people enjoy in their work, then of course that's a good lead-in to talk about how they might utilise those strengths more effectively in the work that they do. So this is very much based on the 3P rule, and the 3P rule is pretty straightforward. We tend to practice what we prefer. It comes up on the screen. We tend to practice what we prefer, and ultimately we end up being proficient at it. So this is about getting a little orientation or a little change around what people are good at. So if you've got somebody, for example, who is pretty much working in the back office but has got a real talent and ability to work with customers, then clearly if it's possible, it would be great to be able to utilise and harness that customer engagement a little more. So that's the kind of concept that we're talking about. Now, of course, that's not always possible in the current role that they've got, but it may be possible in the future. So the strengths and talents conversation may not lead to a change in their job description, but it may, in fact, guide and inform the manager to think about those strengths and talents in future when they're looking at succession planning and the changing of structure of workplaces. So it may not happen straight away. Now, the whole principle of positive psychology has been around for over 25 years, and it simply looks at how we can make people better. So psychology for many, many years was how do we actually fix people's problems? And of course, there's still a whole lot of relevance to that. But positive psychology said, well, hang on a minute, what about if people are performing reasonably well? How can we help them perform even better? So that's where it came from. And the principle, I think, is that all of us have been conditioned into working on our weaknesses from a very young age. We come home from school, we have 43% for English and 78% for maths. The parents, of course, are going to look at the 43% for English before the higher score on maths. So at a very early age, we've learned that we're supposed to be working on our weaknesses. And we carry that over into our education and into our workplace and so forth. I'm not suggesting we should neglect that, but what we should be doing is actually building on people's innate capacities, as well, of course, as giving them opportunities for growth. So it's based on those three principles that I mentioned there. So what this actually means is a concept called job crafting. Now, job crafting is an interesting concept. We all job craft. So when you come into a role, you're given a job description, of course, and off you go. But what happens usually by accident is that you tend to spend more time on those things that you enjoy and less time on those things you don't enjoy. And ultimately what happens is that by the time you leave that job to work in another job, the job has actually changed, which isn't necessarily reflected in the job description. So in other words, job crafting is around changing and shaping the job to suit and fit the needs of the individual. So what we're doing by having a strengths and talents conversation is actually more overtly job crafting. So we're actually making changes where possible to give people an opportunity to be able to exercise those strengths in their everyday work. So it's a concept that's been around for a while, but it's one that I think is very much in line with what we're trying to do here with the strengths and talents conversation. So what questions can you ask people in a strengths and talents conversation? Now, if you simply sat down with someone and said, what are your strengths? You may get a blank look. You could well get a blank look. So what we're trying to do, as I said earlier with the research, is that we know that what people enjoy doing has a correlation with what they perhaps have an innate talent for. So instead of us asking people specifically what are your strengths, which can be a very intrusive question, and people often won't ask that question and indeed won't answer it. A better question to ask up front is, what are the tasks that you enjoy doing most in your current job? Now, hopefully there's something there that they enjoy doing. And the whole purpose of that is to take the pressure off talking about strengths and look at things that people enjoy. And as I say, I hope some people have got some things that they can talk about that they actually enjoy in their work. And I guess if they don't enjoy anything in their work, well, it might be time to leave or reassign them to another role, perhaps. So that's a very easy way in. And what I suggest you do is you actually prep people up for this. So ask them, let them know what questions you're going to ask them in this conversation. Why? Because we want people to come to that conversation having thought carefully about the answers to these questions. That way we don't have these long, awkward pauses while people are gathering their thoughts and perhaps a little bit blindsided by the nature of your question. So what are the tasks you enjoy doing most in your current job? Now, what will probably happen there is that you'll get a list of things, or perhaps one or two items, what you need to do is to open that up a little bit and get people to talk a little bit more around that. So the second question you might ask is, why do you enjoy those sort of tasks? So what that does is it gives the person on the receiving end of this conversation an opportunity to elaborate a little bit on what they've just said in response to the first question. And the important thing for you as a leader is to sit there and just listen and draw the person out to really ask some supplementary questions. So you really want at this stage to get a very good handle on what their strengths are, what they perceive to be their strengths, by talking about what they enjoy doing. Now, I don't advise you to actually say up front, well, I think your strengths are X. And the reason for that is that we want the person to be in the conversation with you. So that's why we're asking them to talk about what they enjoy. Now, by all means, at some point during the conversation, you may feel an urge to point out something else that people have a talent for, and I suggest go for your life and mention it. But remember that it's not always task focused either. It might be the way people think. So for example, some people are very good at being very structured in the way they communicate. Other people could be very organized. Other people could be very good at breaking the ice. Other people are very good at maintaining their calm, cool, collected demeanor. There's a whole lot of other things that people can do that would be classified as strengths that aren't necessarily going to be listed in the job description. But that's why it's important to ask what people actually enjoy doing as a starting point. Now, once you've done that and you've heard what they've talked about, the next step would be to try this third question. And the third question is, in your current role, how can we, notice the key word is we work together to provide you with more opportunity to do this? That's assuming, of course, you agree with them that it is an innate talent or strength. Now, the reason why you're asking that question is that you want the person on the receiving end to have some ownership about what they can do about this. Now, it might well be that there's nothing that can be done about it, as I said earlier, in the short term. Not a problem, because it might be something you just put away in your memory bank and perhaps revisit at a later stage. But the question really implies that there might be something that we can do together to assist you to be utilising and exercising that more so. And of course the answer might be nothing, and that's fine, but at least what's happened is you've had a conversation about what people enjoy, you've identified why they enjoy it, and you've also got some information perhaps in the future to be able to exercise and utilise if and when the opportunity arises. So the strengths and talents conversation is literally that simple. You don't need to go into great detail, and as I said earlier, it's not really a question of you sitting down and evaluating the person on their strengths. It's about getting them engaged in a conversation about things that they enjoy in their work and how that could be used and exercised in their current or future roles with the organisation. So these conversations are designed to be about 15 minutes each. They're not expected to be any longer than that. They may well go longer than that, particularly if the third question does give some insight into ways that that person can use and exercise their strengths in their current role. So you've got to play that one by ear, but really it's designed to be short and effective, and that's the nature of the question. And again, you don't need to read these questions off, obviously. It's a conversation between two people. So it's about sitting down with the person, and as I said earlier, I really recommend that you give them a chance to actually peruse the questions that you're going to ask, to give them a chance to consider it before they come to the conversation. Now, where this fits into the scheme of things is important, and I wanted to share with you the 5 Conversations framework. I'm sure many of you are aware of this framework, but this is not just one conversation in isolation. You'll notice that in this framework over on the left-hand side, there are 5 months. So the implication is that we have 5 conversations once a month. Now, one of those conversations, of course, is the strengths and talents conversation, and you can see where that's embedded in the framework. So the idea is that we start off with a climate review, which is really about people's job satisfaction, morale and communication, which is a fairly easy conversation to start with. And then we move into what people are innately talented at, which is what I've just gone through with you. So we've actually created an upward spiral of positivity. And then we get to the third conversation, and that's opportunities for growth. And that is an opportunity where these are things that people need to work on. So they may well be weaknesses, but they're essential to the job at hand and require some work. So we're still going to talk about that, as I mentioned earlier. It's just that we'll do that after talking about people's strengths and talents. And then once you've had a strengths and talents conversation and an opportunities for growth conversation, there's probably a whole bunch of opportunities there for learning and development. So the fourth conversation there is the learning and development conversation, which is an opportunity to pretty much bring together some of the key points that have come out of the previous two conversations. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean sending people off to training courses. It may well be for you to sit down and coach somebody, or to explain something in a little bit more detail, buddy them up with somebody else. There's a whole bunch of things that can be done inside the organisation which don't require the person going off and learning something at a traditional course. And the final conversation in the framework is the innovation and continuous improvement conversation. And this is about people coming up with ways and means of making the workplace more efficient and effective. And unless you talk about this, it's not likely people will be forthcoming in their ideas. So why not have a conversation about it? So the difference between conversation 4, which is learning and development, and conversation 5, which is innovation and continuous improvement, is that the conversation 4 is about them, whereas conversation 5 is about the workplace. So there's a slight difference there. But I think it's kind of exciting to think that in organisations where I know this has been implemented very effectively, for the whole organisation, how big it is, that throughout the month of December or whenever that conversation is scheduled, that everybody's having a innovation and continuous improvement conversation. And it's likely out of that there's going to be some fantastic ideas. Not everybody's idea is going to be good, but there will be some gems that are worth utilising and building upon. So that's the framework, and I wanted to put the strengths and talents conversation in context so that you could see that it's not just an isolated conversation, that in fact it is an opportunity to be one of 5 conversations, which I think is very, very important. So if you've got any questions at this stage, you know what to do. Just go to the question box and type in or make comment. I'm more than open to hearing your comments as well, and I'll see if I can respond to those as best I can. While you might be thinking about that, we should move on. If you were thinking of implementing the 5 conversations in your workplace, of which the strengths and talents conversation is one, this would be the way I'd recommend going about it. So the first thing, as you can see at the top of the diagram there on the right hand side, is that the first thing we want to do is assess the current state. Now, I've got a range of tools, and if you're interested in implementing this with my assistance, I'm more than happy to talk to you about this. So we get a benchmark, we get a baseline, if you like, of where the organisation's at right now. This is on the assumption, of course, that everybody who is a leader will be conducting these 5 conversations. Then after we have assessed the workplace, we then we induct the managers. So we explain to people what the 5 conversations is about, what the benefits are for them, how they can utilise, the framework to the best of their interests, and so forth and so on. And also, I like to share the data that we've accumulated from the first step, so that people can take ownership. That is, the leaders of the organisation can take ownership of where their conversation or where their climate is, or where their culture is at that point. The next step is we will then coach the managers, because we recognise that managers need coaching. This is new to a lot of people, actually having regular conversations with people, and as a result of that, it's important that we give people coaching. So this is a very effective process. So we have small groups of 5 managers in a room, and what we're doing is we're getting them to share their experiences with the 5 conversations, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and so forth and so on. So they're actually learning from each other. It's peer group learning at its very, very best, rather than the formal workshop arrangement. We've just got a comment here. I'll just Bronwyn's asking, performance improvement is sometimes necessary to address poor performance. How would you reframe the question to address negative performance to re-engage positively with the individual? I probably, Bronwyn, that's a good question. I probably wouldn't deal with it in that conversation, because if you decide to have a strengths and talents conversation, and it sort of morphs into opportunities for growth or whatever, I think it's lost its objective. So what I would tend to do, now, you're probably thinking of a particular incident here, but what I would do is I would park that. I would actually say to the person, that's something that I do want to talk to you about, and we will talk about it, but at the moment, let's just stick with what we're going to talk about today, which of course is strengths and talents. So I would tend to separate those out, and that's the problem with a performance review, is that we're trying to do all these incredible number of things to in a very short space of time, and we don't do justice to any of them. And that's why the 5 conversations framework has been adopted by organisations, so that you're splitting up all of these themes so that you're dealing with them one at a time. So Bronwyn, that would be my suggestion. I don't know whether that's completely answered your question, but I don't think I would need to go there at that time. What I want to focus on is what people are good at that time, and hopefully there's something there that they're good at. Otherwise, we get ourselves into a bit of strife. So coming back to the model, once we've given managers coaching, and there's usually about 3 coaching sessions throughout the process. At the end of each month, there's a broadcast similar to this, where I would talk simply about one of the conversations that's coming up. So, for example, if we were doing the strengths and talents conversation, there'd be a 30-minute webinar which people could attend, which really goes through the questions that we're going to ask, how to get the best out of the conversation, some tips and hints, and so forth and so on. So that bookends the process, so that in, say, February, we're going to have strengths and talents conversation. The beginning of February would be the webinar, and then they've got a month to complete those conversations with their team members. Then there's the implementation. So the implementation, of course, is about the conversations, and many people say, oh, we need training to have conversations. Well, this is the training. The training is actually to sit down with people. We give them the questions, we give them the framework, we give them the support. It's just a matter of getting on and doing it, and they're never always going to be perfect, but that's where we get people back in the group coaching and talk about their experiences. It can be very, very useful. Then what we do is we record. So there is a website, a web-based process where people can record their conversations, or make some notes or action plans and so forth. So there's an opportunity to use that as well. And then after one cycle of the 5 conversations, we then assess the organisation again. And my experience has been that this is the best change management process that you'll come across. And my experience has been that there's been overwhelming changes, positive changes in the organisation, knowing full well that all managers are engaged in this framework. So you'll get some good results out of it, and also demonstrates clearly that it's working, so that if anyone's saying, well, why are we spending this time and money on the 5 conversations framework, it's easy to justify. So that's a bit of the process and how it works. So the advantages, and I'll just put these up and give you a chance to cast your eyes down there and have a look. The advantages on the left-hand side and the disadvantages. The advantages of implementing the 5 conversations framework is you're going to get greater engagement, which remember I spoke about earlier on in this short session. You're going to get more trust. You're going to get more open communication. You will have an opportunity to retain more staff and perhaps even attract, and you'll improve leadership. How do I know that? Because I've implemented this in many public, private and not-for-profit organisations, got great results, and I know for sure that those are some advantages. Disadvantages, disengagement levels stay the same. You created them in us culture. You've got closed information channels. You've got a higher turnover than is necessary, and leadership is very much around the command and controlled mindset. So, there are some huge advantages in using this approach, and greater productivity versus things stay the same. So I just wanted to, before we finish up, give you an offer that I want to offer you this. If you would like to have an obligation-free 30-minute conversation, if you're not in Brisbane, we can do this via webinar or phone, to talk about how you might implement the process. Happy to do that. And all you need to do is to send me an email or give me a phone call, and I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. So there's no obligation there, and I'm happy to do that. The final thing I'd just like to talk about before we finish up is that I've got a Lunch and Learn series, and Lunch and Learn series is all done online, which is obviously cuts costs significantly. And I've got a Lunch and Learn series on the 18th of January. So if you would like to enrol or enrol a number of people in your organisation, send me an email again. You'll notice on the left-hand side the topics, which I'm sure you accept are very relevant to anyone in a leadership role. We've had great feedback from this, and for $295 per person, it's a pretty good deal. You get a diagnostic out of it, which comes out of Unit 2, which is the personal influence. In fact, you get 2 diagnostics out of it. You have unlimited time with me online, and you get 6 one-hour sessions around those 6 units. So by all means, send me an email. I'm happy to send you more information. I've got an information sheet that I can send you which teases out what these topics are and so forth. So that's the sales pitch. I think I'm pretty much done, unless there's any other questions that people have got. Doesn't look as if there is, so that's fine. So I'd just like to take this opportunity of wishing you all a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and a safe festive season as well. And if you go to my website, there's a whole lot of free webinars that you can join in for next year, already organised. So thank you everyone, and I wish you all the best, and all the best for 2019. Thank you and goodbye.